I now give the floor to Mr. Mark Lowcock.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've received a lot of questions about Resolution 2401, which you passed on Saturday, and its demand for a cessation of hostilities without delay for at least 30 consecutive days throughout Syria. I want to start today by answering the questions we've received. Is the United Nations ready to deliver to people who need humanitarian assistance? Yes. We have convoys ready to go to 10 besieged and hard-to-reach locations. They include a 45-truck convoy with aid for 90,000 people to Douma in eastern Ghouta. Are you ready to support medical evacuations from eastern Ghouta? Yes. We're working very closely with the International Committee of the Red Cross, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and other health partners on that. Has Security Council Resolution 2401 been implemented? Is there a ceasefire in Syria? No, and no. Have you got any interagency cross-line convoys through to hard-to-reach or besieged areas? No. Have you been given permission to access any of those locations? No. Have you received the necessary facilitation letters for convoys? No. Have there been any medical evacuations? No. Have any civilians left eastern Ghouta? No. Is there any actual improvement in the humanitarian situation in eastern Ghouta since the passage of the resolution, demanding as it did unimpeded access? No. Can you deliver assistance in eastern Ghouta during a humanitarian pause between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. local time? Well, to quote the International Committee of the Red Cross's Middle East director, who spoke yesterday on this, it's impossible to bring a humanitarian convoy in 5 hours. Agencies now have years of experience with this, and it can take a day simply to pass checkpoints, even when the parties have agreed. Then you have to offload the goods. So, if there's been no humanitarian access since the resolution on Saturday, what has happened in the last few days? More bombing, more fighting, more death, more destruction, more maiming of women and children, more hunger, more misery. More, in other words, of the same. On 26 February, 2 days ago, airstrikes, barrel bombs and artillery shelling were reported across eastern Ghouta, including in Harasta, Shafaniya, Ataya, Hosh El Daware, Al-Ashari, Jobar, Beit Sawar, Hazarma, Hamura, Nashabiyah, Sakbar and Douma. Reports indicate that at least 30 civilians, including women and children, were killed. In Shafaniya, 14 people, including 3 women and 4 children, were reportedly killed and many others injured by airstrikes. 18 civilians, including drivers of ambulances, women and children, were reportedly received at health facilities in Shafaniya with difficulties breathing, consistent with the use of chlorine. 1 child reportedly died as a result. On the same day, 2 local NGO workers were reportedly killed as a result of shelling in the besieged enclave. It was also reported that 2 health facilities in Sakbar were taken out of service by airstrikes. Shells have also reportedly continued to fall in Damascus city from eastern Ghouta in the last few days. Mr. President, over 580 people since 18 February are now reported to have been killed due to air and ground strikes in eastern Ghouta, with well over 1,000 people injured. At the same time, hundreds of rockets from eastern Ghouta into Damascus have reportedly killed 15 people and injured over 200. Mr. President, I want to update you now about the situation in other parts of the country. In Idlib, fighting continues to kill and injure civilians, destroy civilian infrastructure, and result in large population movements. Since December, an estimated 385,000 people have been displaced, with many civilians moving north. Half of Idlib's population was already displaced, and people are being forced to move yet again, with each disruption increasing their vulnerability. Civilians are concentrated in an ever smaller area. Many are forced to live in makeshift camps or out in the open. Formal camps are overwhelmed, operating at up to 400% of their capacity. The response is being stretched to its limits. Mr. President, we're receiving reports of civilian deaths and injuries and restrictions on movements for many civilians as a result of military operations in Afrin. Those who risk moving continue to be stopped at exit points by local authorities in Afrin, preventing them from accessing safer areas. So far, around 5,000 people, we think, have reached surrounding villages in Aleppo city. Tens of thousands are believed to be displaced within Afrin. The Turkish authorities have emphasized to us their willingness to facilitate humanitarian access. We would like to see aid convoys run from Damascus, but that has not so far been agreed on the Syrian side. In Raqqa city, conditions remain unsafe for the return of displaced people. Among people trying to return home, 637 have been injured and more than 125 killed by unexploded ordnance since last October. Medical and other essential services are absent, and access for humanitarian workers to the city remains precariously limited because the conditions are so dangerous. As I've said before, demining activities need to be accelerated as a matter of urgency. Humanitarian access to the United Nations and its implementing partners in Hasaka was limited for much of January due to increased restrictions placed by local authorities. United Nations convoys were blocked from travelling to the northeast from elsewhere within the country. The delivery of aid already in local warehouses was also blocked. While an agreement was reached on 30 January to resume humanitarian deliveries, that agreement will end in March. NGO partners continue to deliver goods and services across the northeast, but sustainable access to the United Nations is critical. Any protracted interruption of humanitarian assistance and services in the IDP sites may push the displaced people back to areas where they're not safe. Mr. President, earlier this month, the United Nations received clearance for the first assessment visit to Deir ez-Zor after 3.5 years of ISIL control. More than 100,000 people live in the town, despite the fact that it's estimated to be 80% destroyed. Infrastructure is almost completely destroyed, particularly in the central and the eastern areas where ISIL was in control. The United Nations has dispatched 78 trucks with food, health, nutrition, protection, shelter, education, and water and sanitation items since last September, when ISIL was pushed out, in coordination with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. Finally, Mr. President, we remain concerned about tens of thousands of people stranded in Rukban in southeastern Syria. We continue to seek the necessary agreements for convoys of life-saving assistance to them. Mr. President, as I told you last week, there was a severe reduction, nearly 40%, in cross-line access to besieged and hard-to-reach areas in 2017 compared to 2016. On average in 2017, for the whole 12-month period, we reached 165,000 people a month with our cross-line convoys. That was totally inadequate. But so far this year, we have in total reached just 7,200 through a single small convoy earlier this month. In other words, Mr. President, we were reaching more than 50 times as many people in besieged and hard-to-reach areas last year as so far this year. The main reason for the reduction in the number of convoys has been the consistent refusal by the government of Syria to give the necessary approvals and facilitation letters to support delivery. So, Mr. President, while we continue, as the Secretary-General's report details, to reach millions of people in urgent need in areas controlled by the government of Syria, and through the cross-border programs you mandated in Resolution 2393, assistance across conflict lines to millions of people in hard-to-reach and besieged areas has in recent months totally collapsed. Unless this changes, we will soon see even more people dying from starvation and disease than from the bombing and the shelling. The United Nations remains focused on reaching those most in need throughout the country, including the 5.6 million people considered to be in acute need. The needs-based approach means that the United Nations will continue to seek to deliver aid and to provide services to millions of people in a principled manner, regardless of where they're located. More than half of those in need are in government-controlled areas, but millions more are not. What the Syrian people need has been made abundantly clear: protection, access to basic goods and services, an end to sieges, respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and you have unanimously supported all this in passing Resolution 2401. Mr. President, I started today by answering questions we've received on your resolution. I would like to end with a question for you. When will your resolution be implemented? Thank you.